Rich Kedzior with us from Wisconsin DOT. We're just going to ask them to be somewhat concise in moving through this. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rich Kedzior, and he is Passenger Program Manager for Wisconsin DOT. Thanks, Rich. Appreciate your coming up from Madison.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, we had an interesting morning in Madison. As Scott mentioned, my name is Rich Kedzior. We had a new train service start on May 21st. Some photographs. I was in Portage myself. I took that photo on the left. And then my colleagues some of my colleagues were in lacrosse. You see the governor, Amtrak CEO Stephen Gardner, and our former WisDOT Secretary Craig Thompson on the left. Borealis, for those keeping score, we've had very, very good ridership since it started. And I would say, having seen the pre-start forecasts, we're about 10 to 15% above the pre-start forecasts. So a little over 123,000 passengers in July through December. I anticipate we'll probably finish the fiscal year at somewhere between 210 and 220,000 passengers. We might see, depending on how well our spring does, we might see 220,000 passengers for the state fiscal year ending June 30th. We also have another service that runs between Chicago and Milwaukee called the Hiawatha. Some of you might be familiar with it. That corridor doing extremely well. It was hit particularly hard during the pandemic because it has a very large commuter, work, home to work ridership constituency. And so it's taken a bit longer to recover from the pandemic than other state-supported routes that Amtrak operates. I anticipate for our fiscal 25, we'll probably have a bit over 700,000 passengers. For those that are familiar, we hit our peak ridership in 2019 at over 880,000 passengers. The positive side of not quite hitting that is we've had to experiment a little bit with fares. We've loosened up the fare structure, and we've adopted revenue management, which is dynamic pricing, somewhat similar to what the airlines do. And that has helped us really increase our revenue. And for anybody who's familiar with how states contract with Amtrak on providing the service, the revenue is really, really important because we only get so much money a year from the state legislature. We need that revenue to basically keep the service running as our ridership recovers. There's just a nice bar graph of our ridership trend. As you can see, still recovering from the pandemic, but I think might not make 880,000 passengers in the next couple of years, but I think we will get there slowly over the next 5 years. Folks have mentioned the corridor ID studies. WisDOT is sponsoring 4 of them. Hiawatha expansion between Milwaukee and Chicago, Twin Cities, Milwaukee TCMC second round trip through lacrosse, Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, Twin Cities, and we have some overlap with the Eau Claire to Twin Cities study, and then Hiawatha extension from Milwaukee to Green Bay. There are 2 other studies that are also going on in Wisconsin that touch on Wisconsin. Scott already mentioned the Eau Claire to Twin Cities study, and then we also have the MnDOT-sponsored Twin Cities Superior to Loose study. I won't spend any time on this. Others have covered the corridor ID study process. We do have some improvement projects going on in Wisconsin. This one, Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago projects, which are on both sides of the state line. Some work going on in lacrosse, track work to add capacity and fluidity for CPKC in the lacrosse station area. MnDOT is leading some improvements in Winona and Red Wing. There's also CPKC will be doing some bridge work for the bridge over the Mississippi River. One project that's ongoing as well is the Milwaukee Airport rail station, second platform. This project is very expensive. It's roughly $22 million. And that is because we're building a pedestrian bridge over the CPKC corridor. If you ever have a chance to build a station, do your best to avoid adding structures and elevators, because that adds a lot of costs. We're hoping to complete this study in early 2026. This is a precondition to adding an 8th round trip between Chicago and Milwaukee on the CPKC corridor. The other precondition is the Muskego Yard bypass project. And we were just selected for a $72.8 million grant through FRA and the CRISI program. And this will allow us to start construction, we hope, in 2027. Design work will start later this year, continuing into 2026. And as I mentioned, this project is the securing funding is a precondition of adding the 8th round trip. We do not have to complete the project to get that 8th round trip going. With the completion of the Milwaukee Airport project in 2026, we are aiming to add that 8th round trip in 2026. And how we envision it is that Hiawatha will get its old time slots back, that is linked to the Borealis, and then the Borealis will get a new schedule. As a complement to the Muskego Yard bypass project, we also have a FRA and state-funded CTC project, vicinity of east and west of the Milwaukee Intermodal Station. And this will better control traffic in the vicinity of the station and help us route freight traffic out of the station area and through the Muskego Yard. And finally, we also have an ongoing equipment acquisition project. We were awarded a FRA Federal State Partnership grant to acquire 9 passenger cars, 6 venture coach cars, and 3 cab coaches that we're acquiring from Siemens. And we anticipate all 9 vehicles will be in service roughly April of 2026. And this will allow us to have 2 sets of new venture car equipment on Hiawatha. Thank you very much. And hand it back over to Scott.
All right. Appreciate it, Rich. Appreciate your moving fast and actually our final speaker is the one we're really giving short shrift to, and that's Greg Mathis, I believe, is with us from MnDOT. And Greg, if you could possibly do it in about 8 minutes, we'd appreciate it. So
great. I'll try and be quick. So thanks for letting me meet with you today. So let's just start kind of recap where we are today. We've already talked about the Borealis in terms of our current services, intercity Borealis in-part builder. We also have the one commuter rail service here in the Minnesota with 3 daily round trips on weekdays and event service to Twins and Vikings games. And there are 3 tourist roads, Lake Superior, Mississippi, and then North Shore Scenic up in Duluth. And then Osceola and St. Croix Valley, which operates from Osceola, Wisconsin over to Marine and St. Croix, and then also over to Dresser. And then we'll jump back to the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. Rich talked about a little bit about the improvements for the Borealis. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that CPKC allowed the Borealis to begin service before we completed construction. I think ridership's been great, but on-time performance hasn't been where we wanted. And so, getting this construction is done is really going to help. So I'll just briefly touch on this real quick. In La Crosse, we're going to upgrade the 2 crossings east of the depot. And then we're also going to add a second main. And then we're going to extend a yard lead west from the yard through the depot area. And so what that's going to allow us to do is get back to serving the historic platform, which is the covered one. That's going to be the platform will be rebuilt. I believe the canopy staying in place. And so you'll be able to use that platform once again. And then moving west, we need to update the Mississippi River Bridge. And then we're going to be modifying a curve coming off the bridge to the west in Minnesota here. And that allows freight train speeds to increase from 5 to 10. And that really opens up that slot space so we don't get passenger trains waiting for freight trains to cross the bridge. Also helps when barge traffic is active, that we don't get those bottlenecks there. And then in the Crescent, we're going to be upgrading a siding to a main line, adding some additional main line, and also building some additional sidings. And again, that allows a lot of the freight trains to get through on that route instead, opening up more space on the river route to get the passenger trains through. And then moving up to Winona, we're going to be upgrading, if anybody's ridden through or gotten on or off the Builder Borealis in Winona, you'll notice that you basically stand on a siding and there's little pads, grade crossings that you stand on to board the train, which isn't ideal. And so what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade that siding to kind of mainline speeds through town. I think that's like 35. And then we're going to add power switches at both ends. So that's going to allow the passenger trains get over onto that siding. Amtrak's going to be rebuilding that historic platform. So we'll actually have a real platform to board off instead of pads. That also provides space for freight trains to pass without no decrease in the passenger train speeds, and also decreases the gate downtime for motor vehicles, which is kind of a win-win for everybody. And then on the north end of town, we're going to be adding some track at Tower CK at where it ties in, where there's a junction with the Waseca sub. And so that is going to allow passenger trains to get past freight trains at this bottleneck a little bit more easily. And then at that area, we need to also do some grade crossing upgrades there. And then all throughout town where we're upgrading that siding, we need to do some additional grade crossing improvements. So last thing I'll mention, we're currently in final design. Construction should be 26, 27, although some of this work is going to be starting a little bit sooner. We expect that the work on the Mississippi River Bridge might actually get started here sometime this year. So I know a few folks have talked about the FRA long distance study, and great to see that came out yesterday. Just a couple things I wanted to note on that is that most of the state DOTs did participate, that at least the Midwest ones did. And so, WisDOT participated, MnDOT participated. So, if this would ever come to fruition, we'd have 4 routes to or through Minnesota, North Coast Hiawatha, Twin Cities San Antonio, Twin Cities Denver, and then Twin Cities Phoenix. And I think the main takeaway is if this would actually happen, it would result in a new hub in the Twin Cities. So, that would really help with the route to Eau Claire and connecting it to lots of places across the country. So kind of looking ahead to what MnDOT's currently working on, we're in the process of updating our state rail plan. This new plan will include a vision, goals, and priorities for both freight and passenger rail. And this is really important because it's going to inform MnDOT's passenger rail efforts moving forward into the future. There are a number of things that we need to consider related to passenger rail in the plan, and that's really connecting communities in Minnesota and connecting Minnesota with the region. Also seeing, growth and changes in travel demand, so that we need to be cognizant of that and be planning for that. We also need to think about system capacity. We can't just, busy rail lines, you can't just toss new passenger trains on them. You think also about reliability, convenience. One thing we hear about the Empire Builder, especially west of the Twin Cities, overnight is not a convenient time to board the train or try and get off and go to where you're headed. Also safety and performance, and I'll talk about performance here in just a minute. And then as a state agency, we always need to look at how we can leverage investments in passenger rail to support accessibility, economic growth, and expanded mobility. I think we saw a lot about the economic benefits of passenger rail. So draft plan should be out either late this winter or early spring, we're anticipating. And if you want to get involved, there's the link, or you can just type in Minnesota State Rail Plan in your browser and learn more about it. We're also working on a couple of things right now. I'm going to just briefly touch on the Twin Cities Fargo-Moorhead corridor. Back in 23, the legislature asked us to do 2 studies. First one was look at extending North Star commuter rail service to St. Cloud. And really the purpose of that study was to determine the steps and costs to develop, implement operating service extension from Big Lake, which is the current terminus, all the way up to St. Cloud. And I think that's about 30 miles. And so we looked at some low and high level service alternatives and assumed phased implementation to start service sooner. And looked at probably getting the service, if we would have started last year, service would probably start like 2036, 2038, depending on the scenario. Legislature did fund it last year, so no more progress in that, other than that we did submit the report to the legislature on mid-February of last year. And if you want to take a look at it, it's on our website. And then we're also doing a second study, which is we've been directed to look at a number of different things, but the primary purpose is to evaluate options for developing transit and rail service improvements in the corridor and including connections beyond. The legislation asks us to look at the route through Coon Rapids and St. Cloud. So that's what you can see the gray is the overall study here that we're looking at. And so I can't say a lot more about that, other than that we're going to be looking at a range of different options that for the legislation include both intercity as well as commuter and intercity passenger rail. And that report's due to the legislature on February 1st. So can't say a lot more right now because we're busy trying to get that finalized, and then but more to come here in about a week and a half. And then I want to just briefly touch on the Minneapolis Duluth. I think Rich touched on this with the corridor IDs. Just kind of a recap of our progress. We got our step 1 grant obligated in late March. The spring was developing a project management plan. We completed an FRA required gap analysis. The previous service development plan, that one was done in 2017. So we had to do a gap analysis of that to determine what needs to be updated or revised. And so there's a couple things, FRA guidance and requirements that change for service development plans. So we need to, do some updates and revisions to, in additions to meet those new guidelines. And then also conditions have changed. So we need to do updates to reflect current conditions. And then we did submit that. We prepared a scope, schedule, and budget over the fall. We got that submitted to FRA draft in December. And so we're going to, kind of next step is to work with FRA to get that finalized and approved by FRA. And once that's done, then they would obligate us corridor ID step 2 grant, which is for updating that service development plan. And so we're looking at probably contracting and beginning that update over the summer. I know it's quite a bit of information, but that's it. I know we need to get wrapped up. So I just want to say thank you.
Thanks very much, Greg, and apologize to everybody for having to kind of move along very fast, but I think we shared a lot of information today, and we appreciated everybody joining us.